Welcome to this episode of YouTube where we're watching the changes within the pack, and that means activities, interactions, social engagements, who is approaching who's hanging out with who, that kind of thing. And obviously we're watching some changes in the weather. We've had a dry patch here for a while where we haven't had any rain, and that means dry weather, especially in the fall, means that the yellow jackets and the bald-faced hornets seem to be more plentiful in a dry spell. We're also seeing some leaves starting to change, which is a bit early for us, but all of these changes are being documented, and this is bolts responding to the bald-faced hornets and to the yellow jackets with intimidation, which obviously is viewed as a weakness. The good thing is he's not hiding in the woods. He's out facing them, but that anxiety that he expresses is picked up as a weakness, and the young ones tend to test him a little bit when he shows that kind of intimidation or, anxious energy. So unstable energy is usually considered weak, and so the young ones just kind of try to take advantage of that. Denali doesn't so much. Denali is 10 years old, and even though he is Aiden's brother, he's not by any means in a circumstance that Aiden was in. They aren't really showing dominance towards Denali. The only thing that we're seeing is some food competition with meds, and obviously Denali still kind of rules the carcass on Saturday nights. So that's the only thing that we're noticing between those two. But other than that, the pack is pretty calm. They seem to be sharing space pretty well. Don't seem to see too much for favorites. I would say the biggest thing that we're probably witnessing here is Denali probably taking a more active role and a more leadership role than we kind of thought. He hasn't been one to be a leader, and so he typically has those four-leg stabs, kind of interactions, doing a little bit of a parallel gait there with them, but we didn't think that Denali would step up to any leadership, and we're not certain how long he's going to hold it because obviously he's 10 years old, but he does seem to be having a commanding presence that the other wolves kind of look up to. Now, Axel sometimes can be a little bit contentious with Denali, and that was Axel with a high tail there, but for the most part, the pack is interacting pretty well, and we do have some surveillance footage that allows us to take a look at activities when we're not in the enclosure, just to make sure that the human component doesn't favor one wolf over the other, or that one wolf gains confidence with the humans. This is Grayson, who's probably the most predatory from the standpoint of catching things, chasing things, stalking things, tossing things. He has a stronger predatory drive than the other wolves, and so one of the things that we do, we feed a carcass on Saturday nights. That means that there's hides and bones left over, and those are great enrichments for the wolves. And so we see some tug-of-war behavior between Axel on the left and Grayson on the right. So they do have their moments when, as litter mates, they're more like pup mates when they were younger. The social interactions that they used to be famous for, pulling on things and grabbing hide, that kind of thing. And I would say that we still see the biggest relationship here is between Axel and Grayson, just as brothers, as pup mates. Now, one thing we notice about Axel is he tries some things, but he's not very confident. And this is Axel doing a standover, or trying to do a standover bolt, but his tail is tucked low, his ears are pricked and turned sideways. He's not all that confident about asserting some status, and that makes bolts get up and do a little bit of a chin rest, not a physical chin rest, but the motion was there, and then makes Axel roll over. And that gives Grayson the opportunity to come over and kind of sniff. And so Axel doesn't have the confidence. He wants to interact and he wants to be dominant, but it doesn't seem to quite have the confidence yet. And Grayson would prefer to stand back and watch and then see who's on the bottom and then come and assert some status over them. So those two are still young. They're still, mentally working their ways into adulthood. But here, Bolts is really demonstrating that he sees Denali as higher ranking. This is what we call obnoxious submission. Also, it's called appeasement behavior. Some people call it food begging behavior because wolves will do it in a circumstance to try to get other wolves to regurgitate. That's how pups do it. Adult wolves not necessarily wanting to get the wolves to regurgitate, but in a time when they're hungry, they often revert back to those pup behaviors to try to stimulate, again, that food begging kind of response. So in this case, again, Bolts is showing some intimidation, so Grayson comes up and tries to take advantage of him. And Grayson has some issues with Denali. And I'd say the contentious nature of these two is notable, meaning that I don't see as much conflict with any of the other wolves as I do with Grayson and Denali. And that might be related to their history. Denali was very hard on Grayson because he showed so much weakness when he first came into the pack. So that's kind of an interesting relationship that we're watching and seeing how that works itself out. But at this point, this is Grayson now. He's doing a little bit of a threat display, kind of a crouch tuck tail around Denali. Some of that may be still food related. So we have to be cautious that people interpret food and rank. And I think it was over that hide that Grayson was showing that kind of threat display. So doesn't necessarily mean Grayson's weaker. It's just in that particular moment it was about that hide, and that made him a little intimidated. But he comes up and he does a lunge to try to drive Denali away, and Denali does a four-leg stab just because he can, and seems to create a little bit of a rally of the pack towards Grayson. So it's important to look at individual interactions, but it's also important to look at the focus of the pack, and that's kind of what we're seeing. So we haven't had a lot of chance to take video. Again, this whole transition is making us spend more time observing, but we are seeing them go back and forth with some tail postures. Denali is involved, and no doubt Denali is active. I worry a little bit about his older legs when he's running and jumping like that. But face-offs are happening. Axel's following Bolts, and that's a little bit of an intimidation. Grayson's doing a standing urination, not so confident. Axel doing a raised leg urination, showing a lot of confidence. And then, like I said, I think the biggest source of dominance is probably going to be Axel and Bolts. Again, Denali seems to have respect from Bolts, and so Bolts doesn't push that much, but Axel seems to push himself, and these two get involved in things. You can see here Axel's tail is tucked, and Grayson's coming from the side with his tail up. So Grayson waits for opportunities and looks for those opportunities to move in. So that's kind of what's going on. We're going to see that settle out a little bit. We don't have any footage from retirement that we took. We only have surveillance. All of our time has been spent trying to get a feeding protocol, trying to get enough attention to each individual wolf. Luna needs body work, Aiden needs confidence, Grizzler just needs social interactions. And so we're spending a lot of time doing that, but they're hanging out as a pack. And so we'll hope to get some more behaviors in the future. So thanks for watching.